So if you're watching live, go ahead and say hello in the chat so that I can say hello to you. Let me know where in the world you are tuned in from and what the weather is like today, because it is cold and it is windy. It is windy out here on the Tidal Basin here in Washington, D.C. So if you're watching this on the replay, thank you for tuning in. And let me know, again, if you've been here before to the Tidal Basin and what it was like when you were here. It's going to be a little challenging for me today. I am going to attempt to maneuver the camera with just one hand because I'm going to try to keep my other hand as warm as possible. So I will go ahead and try to spin the camera around here. You can see what I can see, and we will begin. Of course, just as I start, we get a field trip group coming up the stairs here at the Jefferson Memorial. So I will be checking out Jefferson along with all of these kids. And it's funny because I just got a message yesterday from someone who asked me when they can come to Washington, D.C., and there will not be any 8th graders on field trips. And the answer to that question nowadays, unfortunately, depending on your perspective, is never. They're pretty much always here now, all the time. Okay, Splots says good morning to you. Eddie Saunders, good to see you here, my friend. I was just wondering, Eddie, if you ever made it for your Christmas holiday trip here. So here he is, Thomas Jefferson, founding father, 3rd president. Now, if you've been on a Trip XDC tour, you know this is actually where the tour meets and where the tour begins. So I'm not going to spend too much time in here today. Let these other folks enjoy the monument, these kids on the field trip here. But just wanted to pop in really quick to say hello to old Thomas Jefferson. Bill says good morning. Good morning there, Bill. Good to see you. I did start a few minutes early because it's really cold and it's really windy, and I didn't want to spend an extra 5 minutes waiting around. Just wanted to go ahead and get started. Now, I'm not sure, probably can't see it on the live stream, but straight ahead is the Washington Monument, and to the left of the Washington Monument, in between the clearing of the trees, is the White House. So right about there, that's your White House right there. I made a short video, a short YouTube short, TikTok video about whether Thomas Jefferson is looking off towards the White House over there, or whether he's actually looking slightly to the right at the Treasury Building. And the reason he would care about the Treasury Building is because before this monument was erected, there was a statue of Alexander Hamilton at the Treasury. So just trying to have a little bit of fun with that. One thing I've learned about making these shorts videos is that it's really hard because there's not enough time to provide context. So even though that video was meant to be tongue-in-cheek just for fun, a lot of people took it way too seriously, and that's unfortunate. Now, if you've been to the Jefferson Memorial lately, you might notice there's this giant wood wall up on both sides. Now the main chamber, where the statue of Jefferson is, that's still perfectly available. However, there is this big wood wall up around the perimeter. They're doing accessibility improvements, much needed accessibility improvements, I should say, as well as some improvements to the little exhibit that's down there. So if you look at this sign here, and you can also go on the National Park Service official website and see this information as well, but these are the improvements that they're making. So they're going to be building a new ramp down to the lower level, which then you can use to take a new elevator up to the top of the monument. And they're also going to be redoing the exhibit, which is much needed because the exhibit that used to be down there was really not very good, and almost no one went to go see it. A lot of people went down there to go use the restroom, and then unfortunately almost no one went to see the exhibit down there. Okay, let's see. Eddie says the trip was during the super cold week. that was a bit of a rough week here. Well, not just here. The whole country had a bit of a rough week, I will say. So my thoughts go out if you were trying to travel that week. You were on a Southwest flight. But it was really cold here in D.C. that week as well. I gave a tour on Christmas Eve, December 24th, and when we started the tour, it was 9 degrees Fahrenheit. So I don't know what that translates into Celsius, but it's definitely negative. So it was a cold one. So anyway, here's the progress of the construction from this angle, so you can see what the Jefferson Memorial looks like at the moment. And it's going to look like this in the spring. It's probably going to look like this through the entire summer as well. There are no restrooms currently available. No flush restrooms anyway. There are portable toilets on the other side. And so if you are looking for a restroom, it's going to be in a portable toilet over here at the Jefferson Memorial. And yes, so Splaz asks what's the status of the construction. So hopefully that was sufficient information to answer your question there. It is still under construction, and I think will be for definitely the spring, probably if not the whole summer. It'll look pretty similar to what I just showed you. Hey, Sky Blue Jay, good morning or good afternoon in your part of the world. Thanks for tuning in, Jay. And Karen from Glen Ridge, New Jersey, Marv from Dallas. Let me know what the weather's like in these places because I'm curious. Now, if you have a really good eye, you might have noticed I made a thumbnail for this live stream, and I took it from somewhere around here. I took it from actually over by the steps on the Jefferson Memorial, and there was a small amount of snow on the ground, just a dusting of snow on the ground. That's because that photo's from last year, or 2 years ago, I can't remember. We have not had 1 millimeter of snow in Washington, D.C. yet. So depending on whether you're a snow lover or a snow not lover, that's either a great thing or a terrible thing. On average, we get about 1 foot of snow per season. But the range is huge. In the past decade, it's ranged from almost 3 feet to not even a single inch. So the average is, in some ways, a bit of a misleading statistic because it's not like it's 1 foot season after season. It might be multiple feet and then it might be nothing. So this is not a good destination to come if you really want to see snow. I had someone years ago who emailed me and very concerned. You know, they're from a part of the world where there's no snow. They've never seen snow before. They really wanted to make sure they saw snow on their trip. And I said, well, you either have to get lucky or you have to plan to go to a ski resort or something, because that's the kind of place where you're more likely to be guaranteed of seeing snow. Around here, you just have to get lucky. And Deborah lives in Columbia, Maryland, but a DC native. Thanks for tuning in, Deborah. Hey, Gary Sorensen. Good morning, my friend. Gary from Wisconsin. A former multiple Trip Hacks DC tour guest. He's been on 2 tours with me now. And if you have been on tour with me before, I do have, it's not advertised. I'm still working on figuring out how to advertise this, but I do have a tour for repeat guests. I believe at the moment only Eddie Saunders has been on that tour. He's the only repeat visitor who's been on that unadvertised tour. But send me an email through triphacksdc.com if you want to check it out. Obviously, this is a good photo spot now. It's January 15th. It's the middle of winter. There is not a leaf on any one of these trees. But this is the spot where everybody's going to be standing for their selfies in approximately 2 months to 2.5 months from now. Oof, big gust of wind. And all the trees around the outside of the Tidal Basin here will be in bloom. So the average peak bloom date is around April 1st. Very end of March, very beginning of April. Last year it was about a week before that. Just depends how cold of a winter we have. And even though today is a cold, windy day, we've actually had a fairly warm winter so far. Okay, let me catch up on these comments. Trying to keep my, if I'm falling behind on the comments, it's because I am trying really hard to keep this hand as warm as possible. I can't put a glove on this hand because then I wouldn't be able to maneuver on the phone and the chat and everything. So I'm trying really hard to keep it as warm as possible in my pocket so that I can make it all the way around the tidal basin before my fingers get too cold that I have to give up. So that's just how it is today. Let me back around here. And Sky Blue Jay says, oh, thanks Jay, don't forget to thumbs up the video. I read an article recently by a fairly large YouTube creator who is convinced that the thumbs up button doesn't actually do anything anymore. It was a very compelling argument, but I think until there's definitive proof, people are going to continue asking for those thumbs up, the likes, the subscribes, all that stuff. Now, it is, it's a Sunday, it's a weekend. I'm not the only one out here. Obviously, there were quite a few people over at the Jefferson Memorial before. But compared to what this is going to look like in 2 to 2.5 months, this is a very, very quiet day out here on the tidal basin. And Kenesha, good morning. Good morning to you, Kenesha, and everyone else. And let's see, Ig. Does that say Ig? Hello? Eddie Saunders says the views are so much nicer without the heat haze of summer. So one thing I learned this 2 years ago. So in the 2021 presidential inauguration, there was a surprise unadvertised fireworks show at the Washington Monument, set to the Katy Perry song Firework, because of course. And you can go on, search for it on YouTube or Google and surely find a video of it. And I watched it on video because obviously it was unadvertised. I didn't know it was happening to go see it in person. And it was one of the best fireworks shows I've ever seen in DC. Now, there was an article that I read afterwards that it turns out that humidity is terrible for fireworks. And fireworks do best when the air is really dry. Right now the air is very dry. January, you're not going to get a lot of humidity. Compared to July 4th, where it's pretty much guaranteed that you're going to have the most humid, miserable day of the summer. So really, it's an awful shame that those founding fathers didn't sign the Declaration of Independence in the middle of January. But alas. Now here we have the tidal boats, the tidal basin boats. Not a personal fan of these. But a lot of people like to do this, especially when the cherry blossoms are in bloom. It takes a lot more work than you might expect. And if you're a photographer, you love to frame up your shots like this, right? Put the Jefferson Memorial right in between the little branches here. I'm not really creative enough to get a good photo like that, but I think that's how they would do it. Okay, let me catch back up here. Karen says sunny and cold here in New Jersey, just like DC. I imagine it's probably sunny and cold pretty much the entire East Coast, at least the northern half of the East Coast. Because Kenesha says 51 and sunny here in Tampa. Hey, I'd love a 51 and sunny right now. That'd be great. And Marv says in Dallas it's 57 and sunny. That's not bad either. Gina says 38 degrees with rain turning to snow in Salt Lake City. Now, some people love the snow, but I'm fairly confident to say that nobody likes cold rain. There's nothing worse than being out in a cold rain. But it's a sunny day here in Washington, D.C. I think that hopefully should be coming through on stream. Yesterday I gave a tour. It was a gray day. Gray is kind of more typical of what I would expect for mid-January. But today it's a blue sky, some white puffy clouds, and plenty of sun. So we're about 15 minutes in, and if you tuned in after I started, welcome, hello, my name is Rob. I'm a tour guide and the founder of this YouTube channel and the tour company, Trip Hacks DC Tours. and today I am taking a winter walk around the Tidal Basin. We've already seen, very briefly, the Jefferson Memorial, and with any luck, we'll be able to make it around and see two more, the FDR Memorial and Martin Luther King Jr Memorial. So, go ahead and say hello if you haven't already. Otherwise, I'll flip back around and continue on. And Splaz says, any cherry blossoms peaking right now? Oh no, way too early, way too early. Although there are some, there's I think one variety of cherry tree that peaks, that blooms at really off times. So if you go around DC and you see a single tree in bloom somewhere, it might be one of those. But around the Tidal Basin, no cherry trees in bloom. We're still quite far away from that. And Jay says we walked along this path on our way to meet me in August. Excellent. I wasn't watching properly and nearly got taken out by one of those low branches. Oh, you got to be careful. You got to be careful with that. So I think it was last spring, last summer, I did a couple of videos with Chris from Yellow Productions, and if you didn't know, he's much taller than I am, so we walked along this path as well on our way over to film our videos, and felt kind of bad. He had to definitely watch out for those branches. If you're a taller person, these are definitely a hazard. All right, Splaz says I don't have to sacrifice my fingers, but I'm out here, so now that I've started, I got to finish. Gonna try to make it all the way around the basin as best I can. Robert Hughes, good morning. Robert says we will be there next weekend for our 38th anniversary. Well, happy anniversary. That sounds like an excellent trip. By the way, this is the Tidal, I'm trying to get the name right. This is the Tidal Basin paddle boats parking lot right here. So this is actually the closest place to park to a lot of the monuments, like the Washington Monument. Now, there's a few important things you need to know. This is not, it is a bit of a hack to know about this, but it's kind of not at the same time. So this is metered parking, so you need to pay, and it's limited to only 3 hours. So it will not let you renew after 3 hours. After 3 hours, you have to leave. The other thing is, it's the middle of winter, and there's still some spots here, but it's it's fairly full. There's a decent number of cars already parked here on what is probably one of the slowest weekends of the year. So during the busy times, what you don't want is to pull in here, every single space is taken, and then you have nowhere to go. So I typically don't recommend it for that reason, but if you are coming on an off time and you need to park, because I definitely don't recommend driving if you can avoid it, those are the conditions that must be met for this to be a good place to go. And James Coleman says, what's the temp down there? You know what? Let me see if I can't look at my watch and see if I can see what the temperature is. Whatever the temperature is, it definitely feels colder because of the wind. So according to my watch, it is 39 degrees. But when it's windy like today, it always feels a lot colder than the published temperature. And McGill's says it's 57 in Miami. Miami is a city where I have had guests come on my tour and have said we've never seen snow before in our whole lives. But no snow this weekend here in Washington, D.C. All right, gonna make my way across a little bridge here. This is probably my least favorite part of the walk around the basin because it's the most exposed and it's the windiest. So I'm going to try to make my way across as quickly as possible. Now, straight ahead, that is the World War II Memorial right over there, right off there. And the kind of the disappointing thing about these memorials at this time of year is that the water's turned off. So when we get over to the Franklin Roosevelt Memorial, the water's going to be turned off. The water at the World War II Memorial is turned off. The water at the Korean War Memorial is turned off. and it will be until probably March at least. This may be a windy bridge, but at least it's got a nice view, right? Now, I try not to complain too much about the monuments and memorials because they're amazing, and obviously I'm basing a lot of my business off of them. They are amazing, but the one bummer is that the ones with the water, they were built knowing that for a third of the year, the water would be turned off in the winter. So it's a different experience when you come. I tell the groups who come in the winter when we go to the World War II Memorial, they have to use a little imagination to imagine the pool and the water that's shooting up in the air. Emily Wall says I should get some touchscreen gloves. So Emily, and everyone watching, I should say, the touchscreen gloves are my white whale. I've been searching for touchscreen gloves for years that actually work, because there's a lot of them that are advertised as touchscreen gloves, but they don't have enough precision to actually allow me to, control the live stream. So like a lot of gloves, they might be okay if you just need to open up your phone and open up your email or open up your texts. But to actually have the precision to control the phone, I haven't yet found gloves that fit that. And I asked the last time I did a live stream, I said, if anybody knows of any, let me know, and I didn't get any recommendations. So I would love to know if anybody's found the holy grail of touch gloves for cell phones. Okay, Boston Elevators and Aviation, welcome. How am I doing? I'm doing pretty good. It's a sunny but cold day here in Washington, D.C. How is it up in Boston? Probably cold as well, if I had to guess. Hey, my buddy Rob H. Haven't seen you in a while on one of these, Rob. Good to see you here. Rob says, haven't been outside today, but it looks pretty. Yeah, today's one of these days where it's great for photos. Great for photos because it's sunny, there's a blue sky, there's little white puffy clouds. Definitely a good day for photos. Looks pretty out here. And David says, my fingers are short, so the tip of my gloves are empty and I can't touch my screen. I'm telling you, it seems like an easy problem to solve, right? Make gloves that allow people to use their phones, but it's a challenge. And Boston Elevators says it's 33 degrees Fahrenheit with snow on the way. Now, this is one of the important spots during the National Cherry Blossom Festival. This is the Japanese lantern right up here. I think this might be one of the oldest artifacts in all of Washington, D.C. This is hundreds of years old. This is far older than the city and the country. Now, I'm sure in a Smithsonian museum somewhere there's an artifact thousands of years old, but this is not in a museum. This is just out in the park. Just out here. And I have a video about the history of this guy if you're curious about learning more. I usually talk about it in my cherry blossom virtual tours as well, but I don't know if they still do this, but they used to actually light it as part of the National Cherry Blossom Festival. Like they would put a lamp in there, not sure what the fuel is that they use, and then they would come and light that, and that would be part of the ceremony for the National Cherry Blossom Festival. And Sanchez is tuned in from San Antonio, Texas, and will be there next week. Excellent. This January has been surprisingly good for tour business. I don't want to jinx it by any means. January and February are usually my two slowest months by a long shot. And I've already given quite a few tours. I think 5 tours already this January. So that's not great, but it's not bad for the off season. So like I said, I don't want to jinx it, but hopefully some of that carries over into the spring and into the summer, the busy seasons. And Robert Hughes has a suggestion that I could use a stylus. I have one that I got at the National Geographic Experience. That's an interesting suggestion. I hadn't considered that. Does a stylus work on any kind of phone? Do you have to get one that's specific to the phone? Now, I do use an iPhone for this, for streams now. I have both a Pixel and an iPhone, so most people pick sides, they pick teams. I play for both teams, but let me know. I am curious. And Eddie Saunders said, great picture there with the Washington Monument. Thank you, Eddie. I appreciate that. Eddie, what else did you do on your trip? I'm curious to know. You came during that super cold week. I imagine it was a lot of indoor activities. It was right over the holidays, too, so it's both. The holidays are both a good and a bad time to come to DC. Good because you can get some really low hotel rates. There's really very little business travel happening then. But not so good because, you know, some places are closed on Christmas. Not all restaurants are open on Christmas. And let's see, David says, we have a hotel reservation for April 12th to the 16th. I also purchased parade tickets, very good. It'll be my first time at the festival. Hope to photograph some blossoms. So there will always be late bloomers, early bloomers. So if you miss the peak bloom here on the Tidal Basin, there's always something to photograph. But I do plan on going to the parade again this year, doing a live stream from the parade. Definitely get tickets if it's your first time and you really want to experience it, because you can stand along the parade route, but the tickets aren't that expensive and worth it, in my opinion, if it's your first time. Get the best view, get a seat. We're coming up here on the Martin Luther King Jr Memorial, and it is Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. January 15th, 1929 was his birth date, which means he would be 94 years old today if he had lived. And that's really an incredible thing to think about, because there's plenty of people who live into their 90s, past 90, and obviously it's no guarantee. That's higher than the average life expectancy, but it's entirely possible as well. So today is Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. Tomorrow is the holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And so I think there's probably a few more people around here this weekend than you would have last weekend or next weekend. Now these trees here, these are the world famous Washington, D.C. cherry trees. One of my favorite photos I've ever taken was from this exact spot right here. I took a photo of a person taking a photo of the cherry blossoms. So it's definitely a primo place to be during spring bloom, but like I said, it is Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday today and the holiday tomorrow. So the holiday is scheduled for the third Monday in January, and the holiday is actually supposed to be for his birthday. So that is the reason why it's in January and not any other time of year. In case you were curious and you didn't know, Martin Luther King Jr. Day has been a holiday since 1983, a federal holiday at least. Not every state made it a state holiday until later, but it has been a federal holiday since 1983. This is also one of the stops on the Trip Hacks DC Monuments Tour. Both the full version of the tour and the winter version of the tour, which I'm running right now on weeknights. So typically the tour includes all the monuments and memorials. During the off-season, when daylight savings is over, when daylight savings is off, the tour is shortened, but it always includes Martin Luther King Jr. here. All right, so let's continue on so I can make it all the way around the basin before my fingers freeze over. But nice to see lots of folks here today checking out the monument. By the way, I'm really rushing through these monuments today. So if you're like, wow, his tour must be really quick. No, it's not like that. If you come on the tour, you get a lot more time to experience these than I am doing today. Okay, Rob H asks if I have a favorite spot to take a photo at the Tidal Basin. You know, my favorite spots are probably all the cliche spots. So I like to go by the statue of Martin Luther King and kind of frame up the statue of Martin Luther King with the flowers around. I like to do the shot that's taken kind of from roughly in this direction, so kind of like over here. You can stand and you can get a perspective where you get kind of a wall of cherry blossoms on one side, and then you get you get the water, the Tidal Basin water on the other side. I don't really have good photography creativity, so any photo that I can get that looks relatively decent, I'm happy with. Boston Elevators asks if I would recommend the JW Marriott. Sure, it's in a good location. I don't have any reason to say no to the JW here. It's right across from the Willard, which is typically what I recommend, but if you can get a good rate at the JW, it's right there. And Juan asks, how's the water level at the Tidal Basin? I do not think it's high tide right now. So I have not seen any flooding today, but I don't keep up. I don't keep up with the tides. So if anyone keeps up with the tides, let me know. Am I correct that it's not a high tide right now? The Tidal Basin does flood during high tides. It does flood after major rainstorms, stuff like that. The Tidal Basin is sinking. The Tidal Basin is sinking and the water level is rising. It's a big problem, huge problem. And Jay says, we bought our son some gloves to wear in cold weather. Claire tried them on and was able to type a text. Not sure if you can get regatta outdoor wear. I'll look. I'm not familiar with that brand, but doesn't mean we don't have it. Boston Elevators says we were last in DC in February of 2020, right before the pandemic, and I really want to come back. So the JW Marriott, I think, is in a great location. And Robert Hughes says it does on my iPhone and laptop. I think that's in regard to the stylus. And Eddie Saunders says, I'm running about 5 minutes behind on the stream on my TV, and the live chat on my phone is paused while debugging code. Well, what are you doing working on a Sunday is what I want to know. Eddie's working on a Sunday, not just a Sunday, but a holiday weekend. Obviously, as a tour guide, I shouldn't say that because we're always working weekends and holidays. And Tori says, thank you for all your help and helpful info. Happy to provide that for you, Tori. Glad you had a good visit. So we're going to walk through the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial next. First, we have to see the statue of Franklin Roosevelt in his wheelchair. And this was not an original part of the memorial. This was added years later. It's the only life-size statue of a president, or really any person, on my tour, and that makes it pretty unique. It's also a pretty unique looking wheelchair. You don't see a lot of wheelchairs that look quite like this when you're in a hospital or an airport or any other public place. So very unique statue for lots of reasons. And Boston Elevators asked, do I give tours on MLK Day? And my answer to that is yes, if someone signs up. This year, no one signed up, so I get a day off tomorrow. That's the thing about the private tours, is that depending on the time of year, either more people want to do it than there are of me, right? There's only one of me, so if 3 people want to do a tour one day and I'm already booked. Well, that's it. And then other times of the year, during the slower times of the year, there's not enough people to do the tour. I can offer it, and it just goes unbooked. So tourism is seasonal. Take advantage of the seasons if you can. And Dave Wheeler tuned in from a chilly and rainy California coast. No problem, Dave. You can go back and watch the rest on the replay if you are curious. I'm going to make my way quickly through here, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial. If you've been on a Trip XDC tour, you know this is actually, well, the reason why the tour takes at least 2.5 hours is because this one alone is so big, and because all this stuff, all the symbolism here, this guy and these statues over here, there's a lot of symbolism packed in here. Now, again, like I predicted, the water is turned off today. So no water in the water features here, and unfortunately they probably won't be back until the spring. Now I am in the process, I need to get footage of this, but look at this sign. The sign says Coins Damage Fountain. Now they just put up new signs at the Korean War Memorial that say something different. I forget the exact phrasing, but it basically is an instruction that says don't throw coins in the fountain. Whereas all of us tour guides can tell you, if you ever had teenagers on a field trip before, they will look at this and they will tell you, you know what? Coins damage fountain. That's just a statement. That's not an instruction. So, glad they replaced the signs at the Korean War Memorial with something a little bit more instructive. And Michael Shade, good to see you here, my friend. Checking on the tides. It says high tide is at 150. Well, how about that? I didn't see any flooding on my way over, but we'll check that out a little bit more closely when I make it to the other side of the bridge over here. And Boston Elevators says, thank you for your story about booking direct. We never book through third parties anyway. So I actually have, by the way, if you didn't know, there's a Trip Hacks DC podcast. It's actually one of my favorite things to make is the podcast. And I have an entire full-blown podcast episode on this topic. It's a really, really important topic to me for a lot of reasons. And I am working on making a video on this topic as well, because I know a lot more people watch the videos than listen to the podcast. That's just the reality of it. But I am working on that. And part of the reason, it would be one thing if it was me saying, don't book on these third-party websites because they take huge commissions and it's unfair to me, as a tour company owner. But I don't even list on those websites. So I actually don't have any skin in the game when it comes to these. The reason why I don't want people to use them is because you have worse experiences. I've heard the horror stories. I've been in this game for a decade. I've heard people who, had something go wrong, were stuck without a place to stay, had a tour situation where they booked the tour and they couldn't get a hold of the company because the only phone number that they got on their reservation was a phone number that goes to the third-party website. And so they need to contact the company, or the company needs to contact them, and they can't get a hold of them. There's just so many horror stories out there. And the other thing is just, you just get a better experience, right? So I went to New York City last year and got a free upgrade, which was awesome. But they really made it clear. They were like, as a member of the Hilton Honors, right, we've awarded you this upgrade. They really make it clear that hey, if you didn't book it through your Hilton Honors account, you wouldn't have gotten this. It's just kind of how it is. So anyway, more on that coming up. That is something that's important to me. Okay, let's see. Dave and Lynn says, hey, Fro, from Glasgow, Scotland. Did I pronounce that correctly? We are in the process of booking our trip, which will be late September. Love DC. Thanks for the videos. Well, happy to hear it. And Mark Finley. Hey, how you doing there, Mark? Are you going to make it back to DC this year, Mark? I think you mentioned trying potentially to make it back. I see you've been making some cruising videos lately, Mark. And got to be honest, I'm not a cruise guy. I'm a land guy. So I can understand the appeal, just not for me. And let's see, Boston Elevators asks, what Hilton was that? I believe it was a newish brand called the Motto by Hilton. If you go on, if you look at my YouTube shorts, I think I made a video about it. I posted it on shorts, and you can see I posted a photo of the view I got. It was the most amazing view I've ever gotten in a hotel in New York. I believe it was called the Motto by Hilton. And Mark says, we are going to try. Excellent. Keep me posted, Mark. Once you pick your dates out, send me an email so I can get you hooked up on that second timers tour that I was telling folks about earlier. And Sky Blue Jay says, book a Trip Hex DC tour, Dave and Lynn. Thank you, Jay. Jay is a former Trip Hex DC tour customer. Knows his stuff. And Kelly. Kelly was also a former Trip Hex DC tour customer. Good to see you here. Says, looks like it got colder since we saw you last week. Great tour. Learned so much. It is colder right now than it was last week. I believe you came, Kelly, during a week when it was in the 50s. It was not, spring warmth, but it was not winter cold, not frigid either. All right, let's go check out the, I'm going to cut across here. Let's see what the tide situation is. So this is not we are not in a flooding situation right now. So Michael Shade reported high tide today is at 150. Now in a flooding situation, this bench right here, this bench would be half underwater, right? And you can kind of see, just if you look at the ground here, this is how high the water gets when it floods. So this entire path over here is inaccessible. The bench is unsittable, and the water pretty much comes all the way up to this spot right over here. And let's see, Boston Elevators says, I wanted to do a tour, but I was there with my family, so we didn't, sadly. Well, you got to talk him into it. I've definitely had folks over the years who, some members of the family, they weren't sold on the tour. One person had to talk him into it, but when all is said and done, the people who were not sold on it originally always say it was totally worth it. And Jay says, I will be your UK correspondent. It's always good to have correspondents in other parts of the world. And Josh says, we plan on booking a tour for April. So right now, the Trip Hex DC tour schedule is open through the end of February. And I think this week I will be opening it up for March and April. So if you haven't already, this is a hot tip for all the live stream viewers. If you haven't already, go on triphexdc.com, press the contact button, send a message that simply says, we're coming on these dates and are interested in a tour, and I will add you to the list. And as soon as those March and April dates are open for booking, you will get an email from me, and you will be among the first to get your choice of dates. So that's all you got to do. Just go on the website, send a message with your dates, and say you're interested in a tour, and I will add you to the list. And that way you have to keep checking the website every day to see if it's open yet. All right, so we're making our way over the bridge. Now, what some people don't know, what I didn't even know until I became a tour guide, is that the Jefferson Memorial is actually on an island. Now, if you look at this on Google Maps and you're not zoomed in enough, it will look like a peninsula. It will look like a peninsula with the Jefferson Memorial here all the way at the northernmost point, and then Haynes Point at the southernmost point. So Haynes Point, sometimes people refer to all of East Potomac Park as Haynes Point, but technically Haynes Point is the literal point of that park. But it's not a peninsula, it's an island, and you have to cross a bridge to get to this island. We crossed one earlier at the very beginning of the live stream, and we will cross another later on. Well, right now, actually, not later on, right now. We're crossing back. And let's see. Boston Elevator says, have I ever had street flooding in the streets and metro? Oh, there sure have been, yeah. Not a good situation. Last summer there was some pretty significant flooding in some neighborhoods. And Rob H. asks if they have made any progress on flood mitigation in recent years. Well, they haven't physically made any progress. I believe I had read some articles about how they had an idea submission competition where people submitted ideas for how to fix the tidal basin, and there were some pretty interesting ideas, but I don't believe anything's really funded or approved, or definitely no construction happening yet in that regard. All right, here we go, the final way back to the Jefferson Memorial where we started. And Boston Elevator says, besides it was February, it was a bit cold for us at that time. Yeah, it's February's winter. Winter runs from December 21st through March 20th or March 19th, whatever the dates are. January and February, it's winter. It's going to be cold. There's not going to be leaves on the trees. Now, I am curious about something, so everyone who's watching, please weigh in on this. Do you prefer to go to places when it's really busy and there's a lot of energy and a lot of activity and a lot of people and a lot of crowds? Or do you prefer to go places when it's quiet and there's not a lot of crowds and there's not a lot of people? And I'm curious because I personally prefer to go to places in the off season when the crowds are lower, when it's just a more chill experience. But every once in a while, I'll get people who will comment on my videos or social media posts, and they'll say that they were disappointed because they came to DC in the off season and they said it felt dead. And this always blows my mind, because I would much prefer to go to, say, the Lincoln Memorial on a Tuesday in January and there be only 20 other people there, versus going in a Saturday in July and there's 1,000 people there. But that's just me. And the way I often think of it is, if you were going to go to the movies, if you were going to go see Star Wars, would you rather go to the 9 a.m. showing and have the whole theater to yourself and get a discounted ticket on your discounted ticket, or would you rather go on Saturday night, every single seat in the place is full? I'm really curious about this, because it always kind of shocks me when people say they were disappointed that there weren't more people around, because I've never felt that way as a tour guide and as a traveler. All right, Michael Shade says, did I know this bridge is called the Inlet Bridge and the other one is called the Outlet Bridge? This is why the way the tidal basin actually gets the flow from the Potomac River. I did know that, but in the moment, my brain glitched and I couldn't remember which was the inlet and which was the outlet, and so I didn't say it. But thank you for filling me in, Michael. Randy says both. Kelly says no crowds, quiet. So Mark also prefers quiet, says we went to Oahu, sorry I'm mispronouncing that, in March 2021, and the island was almost empty, the perfect time. Gina prefers no crowds. Dave prefers traveling in September when the kids are back in school. David loves people, but speaking as a photographer, prefers few, if any, people. Robert says this will be our first visit to DC in winter and look forward to a less busy trip. Josh likes it quieter, went to New Orleans the week before Halloween, and it was too crowded. And Marv says off for shoulder season unless there's a specific event. So it seems like at least the folks who are tuned in today are preferring the less crowded times of year. Like, I've always thought, so I've never been there, but I've heard if you ever go to Venice in Italy and you go in the peak season, it's just overwhelming, like you're shoulder to shoulder with people. And to me, that doesn't sound pleasant. Like, I would rather go in the off season, maybe deal with less than perfect weather, but not have to compete with so many people. But that's just me. So I'm always curious about how other people feel about this. Okay, let's see. Randy says, I like DC during all seasons. Very diplomatic answer there. No one should be disappointed either way. I agree with that. No one should be disappointed. And Eddie says, sometimes I enjoy the busyness, walking around, but that's annoying when everyone is at the same attraction I want to see. That's kind of how I feel about it too. Gary prefers quiet, but does like the positives, like a concert crowd. Yeah, so if you're at a concert, you want it to be a lively crowd. That's a good point. Rob H. says, for DC, a daytime, being that it's oriented towards sightseeing and picture taking, I prefer minimal people. Tori prefers quiet. And Jay says, August was busy, but it was fine, plenty of room. Mark says, we went to Venice in May and wasn't too bad. I was surprised. I'm not really sure what the peak months are there. May might still be early enough in the season. So we're back at the Jefferson Memorial. Now I was reminded of the, speaking of crowds, The Simpsons, I believe season 3, either season 2 or 3, the episode where the Simpsons come to Washington, D.C., and Lisa wants to go to the Lincoln Memorial to get some inspiration from Honest Abe, and she goes there, and there's so many people there, and she's trying to talk to Lincoln, get some inspiration from him, and there's all these people talking over her. And so then in the next scene, she's over here at the Jefferson Memorial, and she's the only one in there. And she says, Mr. Jefferson, I have a problem. And he kind of comes to life and says, the problem's that there were too many people at the Lincoln Memorial, wasn't there? And then he goes on a rant about how nobody goes over here to see old Jefferson and how he gets so lonely over here all by himself. So if you've seen that episode, let me know. I think that's a classic Simpsons episode. Like I said, I think it's either season 2 or 3. Definitely not one of the newer seasons. And Marv says, I don't understand why you would want to go to DC in the summer unless you have kids. It's crowded and hot. Crowds here are heavily correlated to kids on break. So many people are here in the summer because that's when kids are on break from school, and that's when you're going to come, take the opportunity to take a trip. So like the last week of December, it's also quite busy in DC, not because it's hot, but because kids are on break. So I think it was Dave who was saying he likes traveling in September because that's when the kids are in school, and that's the key. The key is, if you want lower tourist crowds, you got to go places at the time of year when kids are in school. Now, if you have kids in school, I understand this might not be possible. But if you don't have kids in school, or they're out of school, or you're an empty nester, or whatever the case is, go places when the kids are in school, because you can. But just depends on your own life situation. And I'm making my way up to the top, but about to wrap up. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for weighing in on my question here. Rom says 90% of the time, the off-season with smaller crowds is preferable, but sometimes likes the energy of the larger crowds. And Kelly says that she liked the tour because we saved the tour for one day and did all the museums on the other day. Yeah, that's typically how I like to do it. I like to think of the monuments as one attraction, not multiple monuments, but one thing that you do on a single tour. So Mark Finley says Jefferson Memorial is looking good. I agree, it's looking pretty good today. Not bad. And Randy says, thanks for doing the live. No problem, Randy. Thank you all for tuning in. We had pretty good attendance today. Over 50 of you tuned in right now. That's pretty good for the middle of winter. Jay says, thanks for the live. Hoping to return soon. I hope you do return soon, Jay. And let me get you that unadvertised Second Timers tour when you come. I am going to try to do a few more of these in the winter, depending on tour schedule, whether people are signed up for tours, whether I'm out here giving tours, depends on the weather, depends on a lot of things. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure that you are following TripHacksDC on the social media, all the various places. I announce them here on YouTube, I announce them on Instagram, I announce them on Facebook. So if you're following, you should hopefully get an announcement that it's coming and you can tune in. And thank you all. JC, thanks for watching. And Rob H, thank you for the reminder to press the like button. And Di, am I pronouncing that correctly? Di, just returned from a month in DC. Excellent. That's a good trip. And Ofer likes winter tours as well. Well, thanks all for weighing in. I appreciate that. And helps to make me feel better about the fact that when people tell me they were disappointed, I don't really understand, but maybe they're in the minority anyway. So I prefer a little quieter experience myself. So make sure you're signed up to all the Trip Hacks DC in all the places so you can catch me on the next one of these. And as I say at the end of all of these,